Okay, I think we are about to start the session. I'll ask Dr. Sam Koma to come over. I think you can just have a seat here as I get colleagues in. And Dr. Nzau Mumo, I guess, is ready online.
Thank you, Professor. Dr. Wekesa, can anyone hear me? I am here online. Can I turn on my camera?
1, 2. Yes, you can turn on your cam.
I see. Okay, let me do that. It says here start the video. I don't know. Okay, am I visible? It's a bit dark here, but
1 second, we're just checking.
yes, right.
Yes, we see you. We see you, sir.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah. So this is it.
Okay, colleagues, I think we want to start this session. I'm recognizing my board member, Mr. Michael Sudakasa. I hope you're not going away. Right. And so I hope Dr. Nzau is online.
Let me call you back. Let me call you back.
Also, can we do some testing to
yes,
see?
Yes, I'm right on.
All right, great. So over to you, Dr. Sam Koma. Sam Koma is in the South Africa BRICS think tank, serving as a research cluster leader. And I think matters BRICS have been flagged and flogged quite a bit in the previous session. But without further ado, in the interest of saving time, over to you, Dr. Koma. Welcome. A round of applause for him as he comes.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the presence of our political leadership drawn from the various metros in Gauteng, and also to extend my gratitude to colleagues, academics drawn from the various universities in South Africa, in the continent, plus North America. Okay, they've been with us since yesterday. We really appreciate your presence and also enriching the discussions, the perspectives around the theme of this conference. So this session on Africa-US city governance across crisis issues builds on yesterday's opening ceremony, in which all the speakers emphasized the issue of forging city-to-city governance and also city partnerships to ensure regional economic development, good city governance, and also development planning. Suffice it to say that the UN SDG 17 calls for sustainable development through global partnerships, and also in part, member states are required and enjoined to promote and encourage effective public-private partnerships, civil society partnerships based on the resourcing strategies and experience of partnerships. In a nutshell, developing countries are expected to mobilize their intellectual capabilities and resources with the purpose to achieve the SDGs. And that is the reason increasingly governments across the globe speak about social compacts, and in our case in South Africa, SALGA is pursuing a discourse around building inclusive governance. Until recently, crisis situations have triggered remarkable partnerships between governments and non-state actors. We observed this during lockdown restrictions between 2020 to 2021, which unleashed the establishment of a solidarity fund, which was able to generate 2.5 billion rand within 2 weeks of its formation. That bearing testimony to the work that is done by ordinary citizens on the ground, contributing the little that they have as part of managing, mitigating, and responding to the pandemic. And increasingly, we are also observing floods engulfing many of our communities, and also economic recovery efforts and initiatives undertaken by developing countries, for example. So I'm going to facilitate a dialogue session between Dr. Mumo Nzau from the University of Nairobi and also our audience, because the other three colleagues could not be able to join this session. So Dr. Mumo, you are ready? I'm going to
Yes,
give
I'm
you...
ready. Thank you,
Yes, I would
thank you,
like to...
Professor Koma.
Yes, I would like to give you 10 minutes just to
Yes.
give us an overhead of opening remarks and some of the insights that you'd like to share with us. Over to
Thank
you,
you.
Doc. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Koma. Thank you, Dr. Bob Wekesa, and the wider fraternity that is the University of Witwatersrand, and the whole, the Africa Center for the Study of the US at WITS. And I'm also happy to say that I'm also, at the University of Nairobi, where we recently launched also the Africa Center for the Study of the US at the university, in the Department of Diplomacy and International Studies, University of Nairobi, where I'm based. And I'm thankful and very honored to have the chance, albeit just online, to participate in this honorable discourse, this important discussion about how our cities can work together in many issues to do with human development and, of course, people-to-people diplomacy, inter-city diplomacy. And I'm therefore very blessed and happy to do this. I have been writing a small paper on this. The topic is city governance in the midst of complex emergencies, and I'm just comparing Kenyan and US experiences. So Kenya and US cities experiences with the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, there's not, well, you can compare, but Kenya, of course, is not like one of the speakers before saying this city is not Gauteng, is not Cape Town, is not Durban and something like that. The same way Nairobi is not New York or Los Angeles. But what can these cities learn from each other, from experiences, especially in the context of complex emergencies. And so, you know, the overview is that I have, just I discussed the background, the key issues, and sort of emergent vulnerabilities and challenges based on 3 cities that I zeroed in. Nairobi City, about 4.5 going 5 million people, New York City, and Los Angeles. Los Angeles City, and then we conclude and look at that. Now, the background of this is that in early 2020, in January, thereabout going February, the pandemic, COVID-19 was declared, shut down all national borders and ports globally. Governments turned to a game of containment, inward from global cities to local cities. And cities are seats of power and governance, where you have populations concentrated, and they are the central nerves of traffic and economic opportunity. And I agree very much with the speaker who was there talking about how, for example, Johannesburg is really a commercial city and that kind of thing. And every city stands out. And Nairobi also stands out as a commercial hub, a diplomatic hub in the Eastern Africa, broader, Eastern Africa sub-region. In many ways also a global city, alongside other cities in Africa. But of course, we're talking about New York here and Los Angeles, world standard global cities by all measure. So the key issues here in city governance in the midst of emergency. So we're talking about issues to do with protection of vulnerable people. And you have because emergencies come with a lot of vulnerability. We're talking about how do you ensure that you have essential services, supply lines of essential services, because cities, have people who consume, and we are talking about the control of the complex emergency. In this case, the COVID-19 pandemic, which was the focus that I picked. Then economic and livelihood stabilization, and how do you manage cities in the midst of such issues through up to the recovery phase, and so on and so forth. So we have various determinants here to look at. Political, politics is about how people make decisions, and these decisions are about how resources are distributed, and people will represent themselves and others to influence the flow of policy and how decisions are made to their benefit or to the benefit of groups they represent. Now let's put that into city governance. The kind of political system. Democracies are not the same as authoritarian governments. A dictator may have a lot of leeway. He can wake up and say, nobody gets out, you get out, I'll deal with you and all this. But in a democracy, you just have to listen to the people, and there are many things there about freedoms and so on. And we saw that across the world. People just came out, for example, what was happening in Nairobi, in all these places. Some people just revolt, even in Europe, in places you wouldn't expect. People just came out and said, you know what, no more curfew, we don't want. And there were even disturbances in South Africa, in Johannesburg, in Durban, and all these places. And we were worried when we saw these things, issues about human rights. So how do you govern cities in the midst of all these things? And even when we look at what is happening in Turkey, southeastern Turkey, into the border with Syria, complex emergency here that has really, been so devastating. We're talking about, at least, I think, if I'm not wrong, going 30,000, and that kind of thing in terms of fatality. So resources at government's disposal. Then we have things to do with strategic communication. How do you communicate strategically with the people? Because you are talking about domestic audiences here, people who live in big cities like Gauteng, like Nairobi, like Los Angeles, like New York, and that kind of thing. And you know, you have these audiences, domestic audiences, but when you're governing a city in this globalized world of technology and communication, you're also talking to a global audience, a regional, wider sub-regional, global systemic audience. And so the whole issue of strategic communication and so on. Then basic services, you know, infrastructure, housing, water, sanitation, transportation, in the midst of a complex emergency, such as what we saw with COVID, rightly put by the session earlier between 2020 and 2021. So, you know, questions of a city's self-sufficiency and holistic security, physical security and broad human security issues in terms of essential supplies and that kind of thing. So here we have Nairobi, Kenya. 80% live in informal settlements. Well, that could be a little bit on the higher side, maybe, but it can pass. Semi-formal, but more formal, maybe roundabout there. Underserved, housing, healthcare, water, sanitation. You know, 80%. We're talking about 4 million at least, or 3.5 going. 80% work in the informal sector, dependent on wage labor. Illiberal. You know, illiberalism by national government and dysfunction in the city, county government. So you have some situations where, of course, you know, you have the county administration, you have national government, and so on. And Kenya just moved over just the last decade into what you would call governance by county. So Nairobi is a county by itself, and is a city county. And there's the national government. And then, you know, this kind of push and pull issues, as we're talking about city politics across the world, like even in Gauteng and other places, same kind of thing. You know, it's all about distribution of resources and that kind of thing. City, you know, food self-sufficiency and urban poverty. These are vulnerabilities that I'm pointing to in the context of Nairobi. It's not really, okay, of course, it's a world-class city, but then it has a lot of vulnerabilities. It has a lot of dysfunctions. In fact, in the last election, one of the things that politicians were talking about is really, we have this green city in the sun, but, you know, a lot of garbage and, you know, poor service delivery and such issues, you know, and so on and so forth. Economic inequality, poor public transportation and other infrastructure things. I hope just now maybe my power will not go and I'll need to come back in and that happens, in fact, every Thursday. What day is today? Every other Thursday that can happen. So I'm just crossing my fingers, you know, just pray that I finish. You know, risks, you know, job or employment and income losses. You have in the middle of a pandemic. You're telling people to get in and it's all lockdown and curfew. How do they come out? Where do they go? Are you going to feed them? And there was a lot of noise and very understandable noise and backlash by ordinary citizens. Now, if you're talking about a democracy, how do you manage order in a democracy compared to maybe an autocratic system? So, you know, the burden of doing that. Now, food shortages and price hikes of basic commodities, commercial and residential eviction due to rent defaults. You default in the middle of a pandemic, the landlord doesn't care, you're thrown out. Crime, you know, criminals will have a heyday. Potential field day, you know, potential civil and social unrest. So these are questions of governance, potential health crisis, overstretched health infrastructure. And there were questions of police brutality and these issues. I mean, you want really to enforce, but, you know, you have to take shortcuts, sort of just scare people into submission and these things. So Nairobi adopted a number of strategies: population control through curfews, partial lockdown, essential movement of only the supplies and so on, economic cushions. They started, some kind of subsidies, and the government had to put some money into that to get, credit moratoriums. You subsidize food, electricity, and so on. You supply food, you buy food, you give it to people and such things. Establishment of what we used to call the Nairobi Metropolitan Services. It was good, and so on. Partnerships with private sector to implement public health guidelines to help compliance. Establishment with quarantine centers that time to help people, hand washing, you remember, masks and all that. Health crisis, information settlement, in informal settlement and such things. Then, of course, communication, daily media briefs. In Nairobi, we used to have it every day at 3 to 4. Every day. The minister was there, and the health department people, the director general for health and all that. Communication and mass anxiety management. And it was a big thing, and so on. Now, New York City, USA, we're talking about 8 million at least. We're talking about mass transportation system, commercial capital and global city in a global city. Liberal democratic values were at stake. A partnership, across, in the midst of that time, Democrats, Republicans, standoff, the whole city politics down there. Yeah, but then there are certain strengths that came with New York City. Proper housing, you have water, sanitation, infrastructure, it's in place. Although we saw in many ways, even this whole New York overwhelmed. And we were talking about sometimes just 1,000 deaths a day. It was catastrophic. Better healthcare infrastructure compared to Nairobi and other places. A large economy. I mean, we're talking about New York, 1.5 trillion GDP, kind of thing. US federal funding and assistance also came in. Then, the whole thing of, the whole process now that was emergency fast, what do you deal with in the midst of a health emergency? For example, this one was, context matters. I mean, next time you'll have Ebola or you'll have an earthquake, but here we're talking about vaccines. And vaccines were the thing. And you could see the struggles that companies out there, most of them in Western Europe, North America, came up with all these vaccines. Other countries had theirs, and that's how we had Pfizer and these others, and Johnson & Johnson and all this, AstraZeneca and this thing. Now, New York had the strategy of total shutdown. Nairobi could not afford that. They deployed the National Guard to enforce. It didn't come out. It came with a bit of drama, but